My name is Simone Hartley, and I am a licensed paramedic with the Houston Fire Department. 6 weeks ago, I regained consciousness on the floor of my own apartment with 2 cracked ribs, a split lip, and my hands zip-tied behind my back. The man who put me there was my stepfather. The thing that saved my life was a single photograph I'd taken 3 months earlier and hidden in a place he never thought to look. But before I tell you how my partner found me, let me tell you how I got there, because this story doesn't start with violence. It starts the way all the worst stories do, with someone who looked like exactly what we needed. I grew up in Beaumont, Texas, about 90 miles east of Houston, in a house that smelled like cedar and motor oil. My father worked for an oil and gas company as a pipeline inspector. He was gone for stretches, 2 weeks out, 1 week home. But when he was there, he was really there. He taught me to change a tire in an empty parking lot when I was 11. He let me stay up past midnight to watch thunderstorms roll in off the Gulf. The 2 of us on the back porch with mugs of instant hot chocolate, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. He called it storm math. He said understanding the distance between a thing and its consequences was the most important skill a person could ever learn. I didn't understand what he meant until much later. He died of a cardiac event at 44. No warning, no lead-up. One Tuesday morning he was eating scrambled eggs at our kitchen table, and by Tuesday afternoon he was gone. I was 13. My mother was 41. And had worked part-time as a dental hygienist for a clinic that quietly let her go 8 months after the funeral because she had missed too many days. The life insurance my father left wasn't enough for what came next. The mortgage was manageable for a while, then it wasn't. My mother started selling things to pay things. She was not a weak woman. I want to be clear about that because this story could make her sound like one. She was just someone who had been broken open in a specific way, at a specific time, and had not yet found the seams to stitch herself back together. She was lonely in the way that grief makes you lonely. Not just missing the person, but missing the version of yourself that existed when they were alive. Dennis Pruitt came along when I was 15. He was a general contractor my mother found through church bulletin. He did work on our back deck for a fair price, showed up exactly when he said he would, cleaned up after himself. He had a wide, easy smile and a habit of calling my mother ma'am until she told him her name and then calling her by it like he'd known her for years. He brought her coffee from the gas station, 2 sugars, a little cream, because he'd noticed how she made it at home one morning when she'd offered him a cup. He noticed things. That's what I remember most about those first months. He noticed the gutter that needed replacing before my mother mentioned it. He noticed when I won a regional science competition and brought me a card signed from the whole crew, which was just him, but it was the thought. He noticed when my mother was having a hard week and left a casserole on the porch without making a production of it. My mother fell in love with a man who noticed her. I can't blame her for that. They married 18 months after they met. I was 16. At the wedding, he hugged me in front of the guests, this long, warm, public embrace. And then he leaned close to my ear, and his voice dropped into something I'd never heard from him before. Low, flat, like a door being closed. "Your mum's been through enough," he said. "You're going to make things easy from now on. You understand me?" I pulled back. His expression hadn't changed. He was still smiling the wedding smile, still holding his champagne flute, still looking like the luckiest man in the room. But his eyes were doing something different, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't a request, it was an installation of terms. The changes were gradual enough that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. He didn't like the television on after 10. He didn't like it when I talked on the phone in the common areas of the house. He didn't like questions about money, where he was going, why dinner was late, why the car needed to go into the shop again. He had a way of not answering questions that felt like a wall, not aggressive, just final. My mother adjusted. That's the word I kept using internally, because adjustment seemed temporary, like it had an end date. I didn't want to say the other word. The word that meant it wasn't temporary. The word that meant she was learning to live smaller. I found my escape the summer before my senior year, the same way my father had accidentally taught me to look for it. I started measuring the distance between things and their consequences. I signed up for a CPR certification course at the local community center just because it was free and because I needed somewhere to be on Saturday mornings that wasn't home. The instructor was a retired firefighter named Mr. Okafor, and watching him work, watching the calm authority in his hands, I felt something click open in my chest. I could do this. I could become someone who runs toward the emergency instead of waiting for someone else to fix it. I enrolled in the EMT program at Lamar University. Dennis did not celebrate this. He sat across from me at the dinner table when I told them, his forearms on the table, his jaw working slowly like he was chewing something he'd decided not to swallow. "That's a city job," he said finally. "You'll be gone all hours. Who's going to be here?" "She's going to college," my mother said, and I marked it because it was rare, the way she said it. Firm at first, a small bright thing, but his silence sat over the table like a weight, and by the time he refilled his coffee and walked away without another word, her eyes had already dropped to her plate. I left for school 8 months later, with 2 duffel bags and a box of books. Dennis didn't come outside when the car was packed. My mother hugged me in the driveway, holding on 1 second longer than I expected. "Be smart," she said into my shoulder. "Be so much smarter than I've been." I didn't know what to do with that yet, so I just got in the car. Lamar, then the fire academy, then a paramedic certification through Houston Community College. 3 years of building a different version of myself, brick by careful brick. I shared a 2-bedroom apartment in Midtown with a woman from my cohort named Tanya, who was from Galveston and had a laugh that cleared a room and strong opinions about brisket. We became the kind of friends that form under pressure. 12-hour clinicals, failed tests, the first time you lose someone in the back of an ambulance and have to drive to the next call anyway. She became my people. I hadn't had people before. I called home once a week, Sunday nights, after I'd eaten dinner and before I let myself relax because that was the window where I felt strongest. My mother's voice in those calls was always the same, careful, bright on the surface, hollow underneath. She would tell me small things. The neighbor's dog got loose again. She'd made a new pie recipe. Dennis was redoing the kitchen cabinets. I learned to listen for what wasn't in the sentences. One Sunday, she told me Dennis had started managing their joint account because she kept getting confused about the balance. She laughed when she said it, a little self-deprecating thing. I did not laugh. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice level, "do you have any money that's only yours?" A pause. "I don't really need that," she said. I sat with that for weeks. The word need, the way she'd said it, like the idea of her own money was something she'd already decided was not for her. 3 months later, she sent me a photo for Christmas, her standing in the living room in front of the tree, wearing the green cardigan I'd given her the year before. She was smiling, and underneath her left eye, visible even through the slightly warm filter she'd put on it, was the kind of discoloration that foundation tries to cover and doesn't quite. I called her immediately, before I'd even put the photo down. "The photo you sent," I said. "Mom, what happened to your face?" The silence lasted long enough that I could hear the television in the background. A football game. "I walked into the pantry door," she said. "I keep forgetting how far it swings." I had worked enough emergency calls by then to know what that sentence meant, not just the cover story, but the specific one she'd chosen. Something mundane, something hard to argue with, something she'd probably practiced. "I'm coming home," I said. "Don't," she said immediately. "Not a request, a warning. Please, Simone, he's going to say I called you, he's going to say I'm causing problems." In the background I heard his voice, muffled. Not words exactly, just the weight of it. And then the call ended. I did not sleep that night. I lay on my side of our apartment in the dark and ran through scenarios the way we do after a complicated call. What went wrong? At what point? What else could have been done? Tanya found me in the kitchen at 5 a.m., sitting at the table with my hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. She didn't say "I told you so," even though I knew she'd had her concerns about my mother's situation for months and had waited for me to be ready to say it out loud. She just refilled my cup and sat across from me and said, "Tell me what you know." I told her everything, the financial control, the photo, his voice on the phone, the years of watching my mother shrink. She listened the way good paramedics listen, completely without interrupting, clocking things I didn't even know I was saying. "You can't go in there as her daughter right now," she said when I was done. "You'll just be the thing he uses against her. You have to go in as someone who knows how this works." She was right. I had treated DV patients in the field. I knew the cycle. I knew the architecture of it, the way control is built slowly enough that the person inside it can't see the walls until they're already enclosed. I had held hands in parking lots and said the words that the advocates had trained us to say, and I had never once, not in any of those calls, assumed that knowing about something made you immune to being inside it. I took a week of personal leave and drove back to Beaumont. Dennis answered the door. He looked me over the way he always had. That flat, comprehensive scan like he was running a quick inventory. Then he stepped back and let me in. The living room was different. My father's army photo, the one that used to hang between the two windows, was gone. In its place was a mounted largemouth bass, varnished and staring. My mother came in from the kitchen. She had concealed the bruise well. If I hadn't known to look, I might not have seen it. But I knew exactly where to look. We moved around each other carefully for 2 days, the three of us, with Dennis always present. In the kitchen when I helped my mother cook. In the living room when we watched television. Never far enough away to give us unguarded words. I understood then that this was intentional. He had mastered the surveillance of togetherness. He was always there, and being always there was the point. On the second morning I managed 30 seconds alone with her in the hallway outside the bathroom. I pressed a card into her hand, a local DV organization in Beaumont that I had looked up the night before. I'd written a phone number on the back in pen. She looked at it like it was something dangerous. "He checks my things," she whispered. "Then memorize the number," I said. She tucked it into the pocket of her robe and looked at me with an expression I didn't have a word for yet. Something between gratitude and terror and a grief that ran so much deeper than the moment. That evening at dinner, Dennis talked about a commercial project he was bidding on. He talked about his morning runs, about the weather, about a podcast he'd been listening to, about financial independence. And something in the way he said that last one, the slight tilt of his attention toward me, told me it was meant. I set down my fork. "How's Mom's spending account going?" I said, very calm. The table went quiet. My mother stopped moving. His smile didn't disappear, it just went somewhere behind his eyes. "Family finances are family business," he said. "She doesn't have access to her own money," I said. "That's not a family choice, that's financial abuse, and I want you to know I know that word." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms and said, in a voice so quiet it was almost gentle, "You should head back to Houston tomorrow. I think this visit has run its course." I left the next morning. At the door my mother pressed a long hug on me, her arms tighter than they had any right to be for how thin she'd gotten. "I know," she whispered. "I know what it is. I'm not ready." I drove back to Houston with my hands at 10 and 2 and my jaw so tight my molars ached. Over the following weeks, I started building a file, not out of paranoia, out of training. I documented every call, every voicemail, every text from my mother where something felt off. I took screenshots. I contacted the Beaumont DV organization and spoke to a case coordinator who walked me through what evidence would matter and what wouldn't, and what I could actually do as an adult child of a victim versus what I had to accept. I could not force. I could not make my mother leave. I could only keep the door open. Tanya checked in on me every few days. She brought me food when I forgot to eat. She sat with me through the ugly middle hours of it, the ones where you're not in crisis but you're also not okay, where you're just waiting for something bad to be confirmed. And then one evening, 7 weeks after my visit, my phone rang at 11:30 at night. It was my mother. Not a call. A voice message, short, breathing first, and then her voice in a register I had never heard from her. Not scared, past scared. The voice of someone who's already passed through the part where fear is useful and come out the other side of it. He knows I talked to someone, she said. He found the card. Simone, I need you to know that whatever happens, I love you. I'm sorry I waited so long. The call ended. I called back. Nothing. I called the Beaumont non-emergency line and got a recording. I called Tanya. I'm driving you, she said. She was already putting on shoes. You don't have to. I'm driving you. Get your bag. We made it to Beaumont in an hour 40. I'd called the Beaumont PD from the car and explained the situation, the voicemail, the history, my mother's location. They sent a unit. When we pulled onto my mother's street, there were already 2 patrol cars in the driveway. The lights were on in every room of the house. A neighbor was standing on the sidewalk in a bathrobe, watching. I found my mother sitting in the back of one of the cruisers, wrapped in a thermal blanket an officer had given her, holding a paper cup of something warm with both hands. She had a cut above her eyebrow and her left wrist was swelling. But her eyes were clearer than I had seen them in years. Not okay, not fixed, but present. Like someone who had just surfaced from a long dark depth and could feel air on their face for the first time. Dennis was in handcuffs beside the second cruiser. He wasn't struggling. He had the specific stillness of a man who understood he had miscalculated, who was already doing the math in his head and not liking the numbers. I had done my homework. I had learned through the case coordinator that the photograph my mother had taken of her own bruise 3 months earlier, the one she had, without telling me, sent to a safe email account I had set up for her after my visit, constituted documented evidence. I had learned that Texas law on continuous family violence meant that the pattern mattered as much as any single incident. I had learned that his interception of her communication, his control of her finances, his physical escalation, all of it stacked. He was charged with continuous violence against a family member, financial exploitation, and unlawful interception of electronic communications. He went to trial. I took the stand in the kind of clothes I wear when I need to be believed, not my uniform but close enough to it. Professional, composed. I told the truth slowly and in detail. My mother testified too, and watching her do it, watching her sit in that chair and look at the prosecutor and answer every question in a voice that did not shake, was something I am not sure I have words for. 11 years of her learning to be quiet, and there she was, being loud in the way that counted. The jury came back in less than 2 hours. He was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 8 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice with the possibility of additional civil penalties pending. I didn't feel what I expected to feel when the verdict came in. I thought I would feel relief or triumph, something that had weight and edges. What I actually felt was much quieter than that, like a machine that has been running too loud for too long finally settling into a lower gear. My mother spent 6 weeks in a transitional housing program run by the DV organization in Beaumont. I drove out every weekend. Sometimes we just sat in the small common room and watched whatever was on television and didn't say anything that meant anything, and that was enough. The important things were happening in the in-between. The way she started ordering her own coffee again. The way she started finishing sentences that weren't about him. Her house, the house that had been my father's house before it was anything else, came back to her through a civil proceeding that took 3 months and cost her money she didn't have, but that a legal aid organization helped cover. When she got the keys back, I drove down and we walked through it together. His things were gone. The mounted base was gone. The place was scuffed and a little sad, the way a space gets when it's been holding the wrong energy for too long. We painted the living room on a Saturday in October, a color called quiet gray, which sounds sad but wasn't. My mother stood back from the wall when we were done and tilted her head, the way she used to do with her books, considering. "Your dad would have picked something brighter," she said. "He would have picked orange," I said, "and he would have been wrong." She laughed, a real one. The kind that came from somewhere in her chest rather than from somewhere near her throat. I drove back to Houston that evening with the windows down, the highway stretching flat and lit through the bayou country, and I thought about what my father had said on the back porch all those years ago, watching the storms come in, understanding the distance between a thing and its consequences. Tanya has since moved to Austin, but we talk every week. My mother is still in Beaumont. She got a part-time job at a garden center on the north side of town, which suits her in a way I couldn't have predicted. She has always known how to take care of living things. She sends me photos sometimes. The tomatoes she's growing in the backyard, a cardinal on the fence post, small ordinary things that look, in the way she frames them, like proof. I still work EMS in Houston. I still run toward the emergency. But I have also started volunteering with a local DV advocacy group 2 evenings a month, sitting with families in the waiting area of the shelter and talking them through what the next few weeks might look like. Not to tell them what to do, just to be someone in the room who has already seen the distance between the thing and what comes after it. I know the signs now in a way I knew them before only academically. The way money disappears as a category of discussion, the way a person starts describing their own needs as unreasonable, the way a bruise gets photographed with a filter and sent with a smile, because the smile is the only part that feels safe to send. If any of that sounds familiar to you, if something in this story found you somewhere you've been keeping quiet, I want you to know that the door I kept open for my mother is the same door I'm trying to hold open here. You do not have to be ready today. You just have to know that the exit exists. This channel is where we tell the truth about what happens inside the houses that look fine from the outside. Subscribe and stay close. You are not as alone in this as it feels right now. I keep thinking about what my father said on that back porch in Beaumont, the two of us watching Gulf storms roll in. He said understanding the distance between a thing and its consequences was the most important skill a person could develop. I was 8 or 9. I thought he was talking about weather. He wasn't. Dennis didn't lose because he was caught. He lost because of every choice he made in the years before that night. The slow erosion of my mother's access to her own money, the photographs he didn't know she was taking, the voicemail he didn't realize had already gone through before he took her phone. Every act of control he believed made him safer had been quietly building the case against him. That's how it works, even when it doesn't feel like it's working. The consequences don't always arrive on your timeline, but they arrive. What I learned from this, what I'm still learning, is that doing the right thing and doing the smart thing are not always the same action at the same moment, but over time they converge. When I built that documentation file, I wasn't being clever. I was being a paramedic. I was doing what we're trained to do in the field: observe, record, prepare, because the moment of crisis is not the moment to figure out what matters. You have to know that before the door comes down. My mother taught me something too, even in the years she couldn't protect me and couldn't protect herself. She taught me that surviving an impossible situation takes a specific kind of endurance that looks from the outside like nothing at all. People saw her as passive. What she was actually doing was staying alive, holding herself together until the moment she could do something with that survival. When she finally testified, she didn't fall apart. 11 years of learning to be quiet had given her an extraordinary steadiness. She knew exactly what she was doing. She'd been preparing for it without knowing she was preparing for it. Tanya used to say that the difference between a good paramedic and a great one isn't technical skill, it's the willingness to stay present when everything in you wants to shut down. That's what I tried to do through those months. Not to fix everything, not to force my mother out of a situation she wasn't ready to leave, but to stay present, to keep the line open, to hold the door. I think about the people who are in the middle of it right now, not the crisis moment, but the long quiet middle, the part that doesn't look like anything from the outside, the part where you're just enduring, documenting, waiting for the window. That part is not weakness, that part is preparation. And the window does come. My father taught me storm math. My mother taught me what it looks like to rebuild after one. And somewhere between the two of them, I learned that the most important thing you can be is someone who doesn't look away, not from the truth of a situation, and not from the person who needs you to keep the light on. I'm still keeping it on. I'll be here.